Um, so thanks a lot, everyone, for the contributions to that issue. It started going in a couple of different directions, so I wanted to just have a quick sync conversation to kind of tie things off. Um, I guess the context for this is, we've been talking a lot on manage about how we can manage slippage and predict release scope a bit better. And I wanted to learn from other teams in terms of what's working, what's not working. So I populated the agenda with like a few things that we're kind of trying on manage that I wanted to share. Um, and I think that I don't want to go over these in agonizing detail, but we're using estimates a lot more aggressively. I think that we've been inspired by Create and are trying to use weights a little bit more. So we've started adding to our team's handbook page and said, we're going to estimate things before the release in detail and use weights for capacity planning. We're also going to not start work on an issue before we've estimated it, even when we throw something in the middle of the release. We're also going to take out issues aggressively of equal weight whenever we introduce an issue in the middle of a release. And we're also going to try to anticipate slippage when we're planning work, and then plan for 80% of a predicted weight that we can accomplish instead of 100%. Because what we've seen is that issues slip in either from the previous release or during the release, and all of a sudden we're at 120, 130% of capacity, and that kind of continues to snowball. So that's kind of what Manage is kind of trying. Liam, you had a couple of comments. I don't know if you want to voice those over as well.
Yeah, they're kind of a couple of observations I found quite interesting. It'd be interesting to hear if other teams are doing things differently. But as you said, at the moment, because we're doing planning, just say, for example, a week before the milestone starts, there is a chance that things will slip over that we weren't aware of. Now, in a sort of Scrum sprint environment, this is kind of a solved problem, right? Because you do sprint planning at the beginning of the cycle and you know what has and hasn't been completed. That relies heavily, I think, on synchronous coordination between the teams. So probably isn't the right solution for us. So yeah, I kind of wondered whether all of the teams are facing that problem at the moment, or whether anyone's found a way to kind of, I guess, either change or speed up planning so you have more idea over what might slip and what may not. I think also that problem has probably been compounded, Jeremy, by the fact that I think we haven't been relying on a velocity metric over the last few milestones. Mm-hmm. So as you said, kind of we do have that snowball effect. And I think if we start to use velocity, anything that slips will naturally reduce that velocity going forwards. So it should start to correct itself over time. That's a theory anyway.
Makes sense. How do others handle slippage? James, Keenan, Michelle, is this something that y'all seem to face as well?
So James can chime in here. I'm going to kind of give some kudos out to him, actually, because James is very good at having an idea of the next release very far in advance. So our team actually has I would like more time, but they have a reasonable amount of time to review those issues and get the weights in and things like that. We actually have a process for them to do that. We expect between 7 and 10 days before the release starts that they've already put in all the weights. So this is actually my first full release at GitLab. And when I sit down and do the capacity planning for the team, the items that are likely to slip during this release are from the team members that I gave too much work to. I can see, and I've been able to see this whole release, that they are over capacity. The difference is, and the reason that I did that is because historically they generally do deliver over their capacity. But I think the only real problem that I've been seeing throughout this release that I've been a part of is that all the weights changed. Not all the weights, but the people who I've booked over capacity, whose items are slipping, had at least one issue that was weighted more than what initially. So what that tells me is they actually needed a little bit more time to actually engulf themselves in the issue beforehand, because what I'm seeing is they'll get assigned the issues and they'll work them one by one. And so they often don't realize that it's harder than they expected until they're literally working on it. And so in those cases, I think that if we had digested those issues during kickoff, in advance, we probably would have known that they would have slipped weeks ago. And there already was a risk of them slipping anyway because they were over capacity.
So Michelle, you're measuring capacity per engineer as well as across the whole team?
Yes.
Okay, and each engineer has a different, obviously, weight. Okay, fine.
So for example, I have one engineer, he's only 63% available during this release. So he can only deliver a subset of that work. So first, he's responsible for a lot of things like the triage packs and mentoring others and helping on these P1 issues. And second, he has time off. And third, he'll be on call. So he can't deliver the same amount of work as the other engineers.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the tricks that Dow has been sort of helped in the success of the team, is like he spends a lot of time understanding the context of each engineer to sort of look at what he can reasonably expect them to contribute to like the team's effort. And by factoring in leave really well and like the other responsibilities that are sort of not often like scheduled, that sort of has helped us like have a pretty stable way of planning.
Will it always be, so sorry to jump in there, James. Will it always be the engineer who works on the issue who also weighs it?
So this is actually one of the things that I had to change because I'm new and I'm not technically capable of doing weights like Dawa did. So that 7 to 10 days before a release kicks off, 2 engineers sort of at random will go through and make sure there's weights on all the issues, and they'll sort of cross-check to make sure, is it a 3 for you and a 5 or vice versa? But then whoever gets assigned the issue, that they're going to do the final check because they're the ones actually working on it. So they'll go through and check and make sure that those weights are correct. My kind of holdup is I don't think they're spending enough time doing that. I think they probably spend like a day after kickoff to look at, these are the issues I'm assigned, do these weights add up? But they're not kind of putting in that extra, what do I need to accomplish to get this issue done? They're not thinking about it. It's just a surface level thing. And I think that is kind of where I'm at this release.
Can I ask you a quick question, Michelle? Those issues that changed in effort or weight midway through the release based on like a insufficient estimation process, were they primarily feature or security issues or backstage refactoring? Is there a trend that seemed obvious there?
I think only 3 changed. And I will also tell you that, as you know, most of our issues are security and backstage. So I would say probably, but let me see. So one of them was security. Another one was the merge diffs, which I think I say is performance and you call that a feature. So that's that one. And then I think the other one was also security. Yes, it was. It was the XCSS SVG thing, which spiraled way out of hand.
Yeah. I mean, so that's, I guess, the reason I was asking is my sort of like historic sort of spidey sense of things that have a tendency to really blow things out of the water, not like incrementally difficult. I think, I don't know, my sense is that like it's okay for features or some of these backstage issues, like if it's a small percentage of them, to become incrementally harder than we expected. Like that is okay. And I'd rather like that happen than spend like a whole lot more time on estimation. Like I think the process isn't much fun.
Right, you're right.
The gains are there. But you feel free to disagree, anyone else.
No, that's certainly interesting because I would not expect them to dig into these security issues in advance. They're dull.
Yeah.
They might not even have experience to do that in the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. My spidey sense is that the security issues, though, are the ones that have a tendency to generally like cause the big, like when they're misestimated, they're massively misestimated. And I think the problem is that any misestimation or complexity in a security issue generally compounds really quickly because of process, that it like then becomes far reaching, and you've got other people in the organization that potentially are advocating for like massive scope increases. Whereas like our approach would be like, if we find a bug, we'll like fix the thing, but we won't let the scope increase. Whereas a HackerOne issue, potentially like security would be like, no, like we need to do all of it and all of it's a P2 when you're the person responsible, and all of a sudden it's like freaking disaster and everyone's not enjoying anything.
Yeah, it's like a hard risk to mitigate, and I'm really curious to know like how other teams are handling security and tech debt issues. Like I posted in like 3C that I've been kind of using mentally like a really simple heuristic to just say like about 50% of our capacity is going to tech debt and security. Um, I might actually write that down, but like technically manages 100%, like could devote 100% of our attention to this. And technically on our prioritization page, like, availability, data loss and security should be above feature work. But are other teams going to handle it different? What do y'all think?
Gidley is not on this call. Well, ZJ is not on this call, but speaking from Gidley, which we got smashed with like 3 or 4 releases in the row having like arbitrary code execution vulnerabilities, which like as soon as something like that gets found, you get a P1 and it's pretty bad. And so we kept getting hit by those on like random Gidley RPCs and things like that. And it was very hard to de-escalate them from P1s to anything else. And so what we've ended up doing is actually proactively creating, I think we created like 100 issues and then implemented like a generic pattern for defending against that kind of security issue. I don't know that that's generally applicable for all stages, but we were like, this class of error is killing us. We're just going to schedule like lots and lots of tiny issues and split it up small. And every engineer in the whole team took 5 of those DSL issues. I even took a couple of DSL issues because they're so easy to implement. And we're just like smashing out 50 of those issues every release for the next 3 releases so that we don't get, so we can preemptively do those fixes as non-security releases and not have all the heavy pain and suffering of security doing it. So, I mean, I don't know how much capacity there are in other teams to like preemptively do some of that work. I mean, but that can mitigate things.
Yeah, it's a good call. I think that like Liam knows better than I do, but our security issues really run the gamut in terms of the areas that it touches. So yeah, it's good.
It's the same on code review, source code.
Yeah,
so.
But yeah, I think that's what we'll do is I might just write down just 50% is going to go to security issues, because it's really hard for me to plan as a product manager when we have all these competing priorities in security. I think right now, I think we have almost 20 S2s open and then like 160, 170 S3s in for security.
Preach.
And so it is like depressing sometimes, and I think it's hard to plan for. So I might just write down that we're just going to take our weight, cut it in half. 50% is going to go to this, and then 50% we can use to plan future work with.
We did that on Gitter as well. Like we were massively behind on the security backlog, and we've just sort of said 50, sometimes even 60% of our releases for the next 6 months are going to be security fixing to burn the backlog down. And so we take the approach of starting at the top of the list, and we do everything that's new so that there's nothing that's been reported this month that's going to violate the SLA.
Yeah.
And then any spare capacity of that 50%, we start at the oldest and then like go from the back. And so we're trying to like close the backlog in both directions.
Cool.
But it's still, I don't know when it's going to be over.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's sad.
Management's been talking a lot about 2-week sprints. Does anyone have opinions on this? Has anyone tried anything like this in the past? But there's a hypothesis of like, if we can shorten the cycle and cut it in half, and we can have a checkpoint in the middle of the release. I know Plan at one point a long time ago tried this. They had like a due by 22nd label. And, but I don't know if anyone has opinions or thoughts or if it's worth trying. On Manage, we've been nervous because it seems like a challenging thing to try out while we're also trying these estimation changes. But interested in opinions there.
Before GitLab, I only ran weekly iterations. We did extreme programming. So we would do monthly release planning, and then we would chunk that down into more or less 4 weekly iterations. Each week we would do iteration planning and a retrospective and make commitments about what we're going to get done that iteration, which made it a lot easier. It's hard to do in GitLab, I think, because of the asynchronous nature. It's hard to team level planning, and I've seen that like by us a lot of times. But I do think there's a lot of value there. And the other thing that I see would be a lot of value, and that works, is limiting work in progress. So if you have a team, of 10 engineers, there's a maximum of 20 issues or 15 issues or maybe even 10 issues that can be in flight at any given one time, which is like in dev, in review or in verification. And if like you can't have more than 10 total, and that forces everybody to work on those things together instead of like letting one engineer have 7 issues in flight that then they're context switching and hopping around and is wasteful. But yeah, I do agree with shorter iterations. GitLab right now is not tooled to do that well, I don't think. But that's one of the things I want to work on and plan.
How does that work with like the review time? Because I know for this release, the first 2 or 3 issues to get delivered and closed, it took about 13 business days for that to happen.
That's part of the problem. And that's where I think analytics is working on value stream management, where you can take like our entire workflow from start to finish and measure like time in each stage. Yeah. And the idea is once that's in place, then we can say, okay, where are we wasting the most time, or what's taking the longest? Let's go fix the process. And with reviews, if it's taking, or even verification, or either of those, it's taking 13 days. That's way too long. Like that means that A, there wasn't enough thought put into things ahead of time. B, like somebody on another team is the reviewer and just it's not high on their priority list. And I think that's one of the downsides of doing things like in a monolithic app where you have like one team can't ship their own things, which is a safety net, but it also is like a hindrance. And we should be able to ship things as like small teams on our own in a safe way. So it's my 2 cents about that.
I'm interested to hear that perspective. I am a strong advocate of limiting work in progress, and having engineers sort of be like strong about that. I think that has to be driven from engineers wanting to and buying into that. But I am not an advocate of short sprints. And in my previous company, we tried everything from 1 week, 2 week, 1 month to 6 week sprints. And we were most effective working on 6 week sprints, which in sort of the model of Basecamp. And although maybe like the issue velocity was lower, we shipped more value, and engineers were much more focused on solving problems than closing issues. And so we did the whole like split the team in half and have like big projects and small batch, where we had like rotating people sort of with different focuses. Like we had the sort of backlog of tiny little like arbitrary random fix-ups, and then we had like 1 or 2 big things that we're working on, and we'd ship multiple iterations in that 6 weeks. Like 6 weeks wasn't the frequency we were deploying. We were deploying multiple times a day continuously. And we were measuring continuously and like tweaking and listening to feedback continuously, but we only planned, like we did the planning and focus, like we're doing this for 6 weeks. And that was like the only planning cycle we had. And that worked really well, because as a product manager, I'm very concerned that I don't want to be in the business of project managing. I don't want to be in the business of dealing with like tiny little issues all the time and like who's going to do what next. Like I want to focus on the problems and creating value for customers. And I feel like the shorter the sprint, the harder it is for a product manager to actually focus on product strategy and value to customers. And that's been my experience with shortening sprints and going like really agile scrum, and it pushes lots of process onto product managers that is not value creating.
I personally agree to a certain extent. I think that like you do get some really nice benefits from like for the predictability standpoint by moving to shorter sprints. I think that there's like, it's kind of like antithetical to like our culture of like velocity over predictability to a certain degree, because I think that from a velocity standpoint, when it comes to closing issues, like shorter sprints is probably better. But I agree with all your points that It allows for deeper exploration. For me, like on managed, like I've pushed back on like moving to shorter sprints simply because like I don't have the personal capacity to be able to manage it. Like all product managers at GitLab are stretched pretty thin, and then that increases the amount of time we need to spend planning and managing releases, and less time we're able to just talk to customers and dig into problems. So I think that's like the highest leverage use of our time. So I agree with your standpoint, with your perspective, James, but like I do think I do wonder like how we can increase on manage like the amount of predictability by having these like really short chunks of work to say like 1 week, how we accomplish what we set out to accomplish. Yes, no, maybe. What does that mean for the next? And I think that the challenge for us from a predictability standpoint is like we're doing planning right now while 12.4 is still in flight. And then so the confidence level I have and like the amount of capacity we'll have to be able to accomplish our goals for 12.5 is it's much more uncertain than I'll have on the 22nd when we've actually like finished and then packaged and released 12.4. So I think that like the end problem that I'm trying to solve with it is like how can we move like our planning process like closer and like just in time as possible, so that like I have like the best information possible that I can make decisions with as a product manager. That seems
that's
like
really
you can solve it
interesting.
in a different way, but that's what I'd like to move towards.
Yeah, I've kind of thrown the importance of like having confidence in when things going to ship out the window. Like I don't really care about that as long as we do them in the right order, as long as the next thing we work on creates value and like the end result is useful to customers. Like if it slips a release, whatever, like we were working on it, we're doing it. Like, I mean, like the difference to the customer, like sure, like they're going to be annoyed that we communicated one thing and with like a release late, like as long as we're not telling them we're going to do it now and then we do it 12 months from now, like it's iteration. They can see it happening. We're completely open. It's not like a company where everything's hidden. And I don't know, I used to care more about that, but I've begun to care less and less. And I mean, there's 1 or 2 customers that get really annoyed, but then like the rest of them, it's like, you know what, like we're solving your problems. Like no other company is giving you like that level of granularity and certainty. And that's not what like matters. Like,
Oh, totally. Like I don't want to.
And so like I just don't care anymore about.
I don't want to over
really
optimize it but when we're slipping 60% of our kickoff items in a release that we may have gone the other direction a little too much. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I would want to try and keep that in the 20% marker, and I think it's also important to like have a like it. I want it to be 20% of the new release came from the last one, not 20% over capacity, because if you take the percentages the wrong way, it suddenly becomes like more like 40%.
Right.
So it's important to get your percentage calculation the right way around, because I think the old like overplan one resulted in nearly like 45% slippage was like the target. Like when you actually you overplan by 20-30% or something like that, it turned into 45% of like your actual true capacity, which is terrible.
So one of the things that I found interesting in the conversation we had about sort of a shorter development cycle was that we're kind of prevented from doing that through some of the inefficiency. So some of the things we've mentioned on this call already, such as how long it takes to do planning, maybe how long it takes to get an issue through code review, the fact that we don't have like continuous delivery. And I think the feeling I kind of got was that some of the things we need to do to enable shorter cycles will probably be worth a lot more value than actually changing the length of the cycle itself. So maybe kind of the focus should be more on those things. So what do we have to do to reduce the code review time? What do we have to do to move towards like a continuous deployment setup? I think if we have all of those, it just feels to me that we're going to be, certainly from a velocity point of view, and I think to your point, James, about actually shipping stuff, not necessarily knowing when it's going to be shipped because you know that you're working on it and that's kind of the best that you can do. And it just feels like those things will be a lot more valuable. But and maybe that's a benchmark, like whilst we are saying as a team, we don't think we can reasonably move to 2-week cycles because there are blockers. I don't know, that just doesn't quite feel right to me, because it feels like those blockers are inefficiencies that we should probably be solving anyway.
Yeah, I want to second that. Like one thing that stands out to me, like, is the inefficiency of our CI process. Like the fact that CI takes an hour and a half or whatever it is just a massive impediment to velocity. Like if we were deploying more frequently as well, like those things really make a big impact on how quickly, like if everyone's starting a new issue on the 18th or whatever the first day of the new release is, and like you've got hours and hours of CI pipelines before anything can happen and merge. Like there's no way you're going to actually merge anything in the first 2 days because you're like, write it on the first day. There's no way your CI pipeline is going to go green before you clock off for the first day. And then you have feedback arriving on the second day. Everything's like coming in parallel. It's like everything's slowed down and jammed up because pipelines are slow. Like
Well,
you can't
that's
have
not going to
those.
get any better. It's just going to keep getting worse because we're creating a monolithic app. So like when we run our CI, as like I think we only had what 10% of test coverage for front end tests, and we're trying to get to 100%, and those are really really slow to run. They take a long time. So as we add more tests on a monolithic application, it's just going to keep taking longer and longer and longer. And the only way to really fix the problem is to break the architecture up into smaller pieces that are kind of more autonomous but maintain contracts with each other. But like that, even presenting that idea or going that direction seems like
I don't necessarily buy that. A year ago, we were at 1 hour pipelines. I know we've added more features since last year, and a lot changes in 12 months, but we don't have a culture of writing tests to be fast. We could spend more money and parallelize more. We could actually design tests to be quick. Like if we were in a culture that valued fast CI pipelines and test coverage, we would make it work. Like they're a team, well, like the Gitaly team invest effort, engineering effort, and we schedule work to make the pipelines fast, even though our pipelines are not even 5 minutes. Like we care about pipelines being fast because we know that it makes a really big difference to like have as much automation as possible for all this kind of stuff. And when I talk to customers, like HackerOne was a really incredible customer call. They're like, oh, we don't have any code review feedback. Like, yeah, there's things that are buggy, but we don't care because like we use GitLab CI, we spend all this money on parallelizing our builds and they take 5 minutes. And that just changes the whole culture of code quality and the whole way we do software. Like everything else doesn't matter. We just used GitLab CI and the tools that it gave us, spent all this money and bang, like our whole engineering culture is like incredible. And it's not like the only customer that I've heard that from. At my old company, we used to have 30-minute pipelines and we did like 3 months of effort rewriting and changing the architecture of the tests so that we could get them to 5 minutes. And then we switched from daily or weekly deploys to continuous deployment. That changed the culture far more than any of our planning process changed the culture. So, I mean, we have to I think we can't just look at this from one angle.
There are other techniques to cached builds and things like that. But the thing that I really want to say is I think between product and engineering, we probably all agree that context switching is really a killer in everything that was just mentioned, the CI builds and the review time and all of that. That's context switching, and it really does kill us. Like last week, I witnessed for myself an MR. It got one commit a day every single day last week, and it just finally merged yesterday. And it's just, and the time zones, which I know we can't do anything about, but it's like at night, somebody will review it again. 24 hours later, the change will go through. 24 hours later, it'll get reviewed again. And just things like that. It is context switching, and that's taking away from work because the engineers aren't just sitting there doing nothing. They're picking up another task, but they'll never finish it. They'll never finish the other task because they're still technically working on this one that keeps bouncing back and forth and the CI builds and stuff like that. So I agree. I think that if we're going to focus on anything, it should probably be that. Yeah.
Cool. We're at time. Thanks everyone for the conversation. I think the takeaway for me was I think that I was inspired by Create, how y'all are measuring capacity on like a per engineer basis. That might be something that for us to consider doing and continue to invest more in estimation. There's probably maybe a discussion to have with engineering leadership among on code review time if that's continuing to happen. as well as like the speediness of our CI, which I agree is really important. So
I'll put in a link to an issue because I've been agitating this for a while. So there are some issues around this.
cool.
This is pet peeve.
All right. I'll jump in. Thanks a lot, y'all.
Thank you.
Have a great one.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. See ya.